Hi, I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. Middle of winter, it's a good time to be thinking about what you're planning to do this year. And one of the big things we always face is, what do we do with the hive that might want to swarm? So my answer to that is, if you're not splitting hives and you don't need more bees, don't split your hive. Instead, do a manipulation called the Demaree method, which I've done videos on before. But there are a lot of ways in which you can adopt the principles of the Demaree method to both prevent swarming, to build up a big, strong population of bees in your hive, and to result in a huge honey crop. Hundreds of pounds of honey, whereas your typical hive might produce 50 to 100 pounds of honey. So this method has worked very, very well for me. Let's have a look at it. Here's a few of the permutations of the Demaree method. Okay, so we are talking about the Demaree method. And there are many permutations of this method. And that's the purpose of this video, to show you that there's a lot of different ways that apply the principle of the Demaree method, which you can do and vary depending on the circumstances that you find yourself in. So you may have the situation where you've got a colony in the spring and it's growing very nicely, growing very rapidly, and it's just got to the point where you're looking forward to seeing it make some honey, and all of a sudden you're finding queen cells in. So what do you do? So let's start off in the typical beginning here. Got our bottom board. We've got one deep super, two deep supers, and let's say we've already got one honey super on there. And in between the deep super and the honey super, let's say we've put in a queen excluder. Now, inside the brood chamber, we've got lots of frames of brood. And let's say, and I'm going to use two colors for the brood, one for open brood and one for capped brood. That doesn't look dark, doesn't show up in different enough. So we're going to call this brown capped brood. Okay, and let's say you've got your typical pattern. You've got lots of the queen has been laying in the middle here, and we've got lots of open brood here, and we've got loads of capped brood here. But we go into the hive, so we've got a typical brood nest. We've got, let's say, 6, 9. We've got about 15 frames of brood here, really thriving. But what we come across is some queen cells. And we're in a dilemma now. What do we do? Do we split the hive? If we split the hive, we end up with a colony that's not going to produce as much honey as it would be. And we're interested, in this particular case, in making honey. So what do? We can go through here and go through each frame and cut out every queen cell, and hopefully we don't miss any. If we cut out every queen cell, the colony won't swarm, but they will rebuild those queen cells. And so we'll have to go in next week and remove all of the queen cells that we can find. And we'll have to go in the following week, and the following week, and the following week, until the honey flow finishes. Otherwise, as soon as we're within a day or two of these queen cells emerging, boom, half your bees are going to go. And when that swarm goes, it'll be one whopper of a swarm as well. And that will be the end of your honey production. But maybe you've, by that stage, filled up another couple of honey supers, and you're off to the races. So that's great. But in all probability, we're going to miss a queen cell, and we may have a swarm quite early. So what we really want to do is have a big population of bees, but without the risk of swarming. The other disadvantage of this method, just cutting out queen cells, is gradually, when we get into a really good honey flow, this upper brood chamber is going to fill up with honey as well, giving us a smaller and smaller amount of space for the queen to lay. And also, all those young bees are packed in there trying to look after the brood here along with the queen. And it's the presence of a relatively cramped brood quarters in terms of space to lay is one factor. The other factor is lots of bees, lots of young bees. And if you have lots of young bees with the queen and a diminishing amount of space, that leads to a swarm. So what we want to do is separate the queen from those young bees. And that's what we do with the Demaree method. So one alternative with the Demaree method is you start off your base here. You find the queen in the hive, and she goes down in this super here. And we take all of the capped brood, goes in here with her. Because this is this brood that is going to quickly empty, they're going to emerge, and that can provide you with lots of space to lay. We put a queen excluder in here. We put in a honey super here, and we put the second brood chamber up here. And in that second brood chamber, we put all the young brood. Now, what's going to happen here is that the queen is down here in an area that's going to have a lot of vacant space become available very soon. The house bees don't need to look after the capped brood. They move up to the open brood to look after the open brood. So now we have depopulated the area where the queen is, and that results in the urge to swarm disappearing, because we still have room here, which is always available for the queen, but the population of young bees has gone up to the top. The problem is that in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have to go back up here. But before that even, because we've separated the young brood from the capped brood, there's going to be a tendency for queen cells to develop in here as the bees up here act as if there is no longer a queen, because they're not in direct contact with the queen. They're separated now by a couple of honey supers, maybe more. And so you'll have to go into this hive the following week and cut out every queen cell in here. But once you've done that, you've now stopped the urge to swarm. And they don't have an alternative here. Down here, you're very unlikely now to find queen cells. And up here, they cannot build any more queen cells because there's no eggs. Everything that was after a week is now a week old at the minimum. And so they can't build queen cells from those. Problem is that this is going to fill up with honey. What you will find in a week's time is that most of this is now capped brood. And so once you've taken out the queen cells, you're going to want to swap frames and put your capped brood down here. So this all wants to be capped, and this all wants to be open, or as near as you can make it. Obviously, there's going to be a mixture along all of the frames there. So it will work for a little while until basically what the problem is, the limiting factor with this setup is that it fills up with honey. Eventually your brood frames fill up with honey, and you have to you've got to replace your brood frames. You've got to take your frames of honey out and put open frames in there. Otherwise, you're going to run out of room, and that will cause the swarm. So this simple method of the Demaree method, to me, is too basic. So here's another option. You take your hive and you put 2 brood chambers down here. And in here, you put only capped brood in here. And above it, you've got your honey supers. And you've got your open brood up here. Okay. Now, you've got honey in these supers. Again, you're going to have the issue with this box eventually becoming full of honey. And again, you're going to be wanting to go in here and remove queen cells after the first week. But you put a super here, a foundation, or better still, drawn comb. And now the queen has a big area to lay. So you bought yourself at least another couple of weeks here, because you've got now a big space for the queen to lay down here successfully. And so you're going to find that this will work better than that because you provided that extra deep super. But let's look at another option. And all of these are the same principle. I've got on here, you're putting your queen excluder in here as well. No, sorry, no, the queen excluder is not going there. Queen excluder is here. Not there. So here's a third option. You put your, and the queen was here, of course. You've got your queen here with just a single frame of brood. Then you put your queen excluder over it. Then you put your honey supers on. And you're putting these on because you're buying space both for the honey to go, but also as a way of separating out the queen, separating the queen from her brood. And so what you've done here is, instead of just taking one of these supers and put it down here, you put a totally new super here and only put 1 frame of brood in here, to which you're adding other frames of either foundation or drawn comb. You move both of your brood chambers here. And if you watch one of my videos about the Demaree method, which has actually been one of my which has in fact been my most popular video, you'll see that this is the method that I used here. And so all of your brood, just like it is here, is moved up to the top. And so again, you're going to go through here because in a couple of weeks' time, they're going to make queen cells because they think they're separated from the queen. You cut those out, and once you've cut those out, then the queen, the only place for them to rear brood is down here. The downside of this one is you're only leaving yourself with a 10 frame brood chamber as opposed to a larger brood chamber. But I think that this one is most likely to give you the most honey, because come the middle to end of the brood, the honey flow, you want the ratio of field bees to nurse bees to be very high. And this will minimize the number of bees that are working on brood and maximize the number of bees in your huge hive which are working on honey flow. Because now there's no bees looking after brood up here, it's all honey, and this is all honey. You just have a solid pack of brood down here, so they're using it very efficiently. And this one works very well. But I've seen other examples where you can do it where you put in 2 brood chambers. You put your queen here with your frame of capped brood. You put another deep brood chamber on here with just foundation. Queen excluder goes there. Your honey supers and your former brood nest up here. And again, you go in after a couple of weeks, remove the queen cells, and you're done with that. So what this will give is the queen has loads of room to lay in here. Now, there's several things to take into consideration before you adopt one of these strategies. First of all, if you're in an area with small hive beetles or wax moth issues, do not over super hive. Do not make so much room in the hive that they cannot patrol everywhere. And as you can see, this one does quite a lot of that. It's adding 2 deep supers and maybe a honey super. So you may want to not put on an extra honey super because these will act as honey supers. If you don't have enough bees to fill these boxes, then do it more gradually. I'd opt for that, this method. Because you're not adding quite as much space here. Also, if you do these at the right time in the season, it depends on the time of year if you're doing it. If you're doing it when you've got a relatively modest population, when there's only 3 supers here, then you may want to do a smaller version of it. If you got swarm cells early in the season before the colony got big. But let's say if you've already got 2 or 3 honey supers on here, now you've got a lot of bees up here already. Now you've got a big enough population to be doing one of these or even one of these manipulations. So you've got enough bees now to really fill those boxes up. So the pros and cons of doing a Demaree split. Pros, cons. Number 1, stop swarming. That's the foremost one. Another positive, get a big hive population. And finally, this is one reason, the reason that you're doing it is you get a lot of honey. When I do the Demaree manipulation, typically I end up with 150 to 250 pounds of honey per hive when I do that, if I am able to do it early enough in the season. If it's towards the end of the season, I might only get 100 pounds. But if I do it as the honey flow is really developing, I can get an awful lot of honey because these are hives that would have swarmed anyway. So this is a great way of getting very high population. And it's the bigger the population of bees, especially if the ratio of field bees to nurse bees is relatively low, then you get a field bee, the ratio is actually high field bees, low nurse bees, then you end up with a much bigger honey crop. Negatives. Number 1, okay, for some people, finding the queen. But that need not be a problem. Finding the queen need not be an issue because what do you do when you can't find the queen? What you do is you shake all the bees down into the bottom box, put the queen excluder on. Now you know the queen is confined to the bottom box. So in this particular case, if you always have difficulty finding the queen, you put your empty box on your hive stand, put your frames in, 9 of your frames in there, ready for the space with the cat brood. Find your appropriate frame of cat brood, put that in there, and now you shake every bee out of this hive into that box, put the queen excluder on, and you know the queen is there. So you never actually had to find the queen. But what that does mean is you have you've really disturbed bees. And so that can lead to bee stings. So be prepared. If you're going to do the Demaree split, you're going to have to really go through the hive. Also remember, you're going through every frame in the brood chamber anyway because you have to cut out all the queen cells. So there's a lot of work involved. Having said that, if you don't do a Demaree split, you've probably got even more work. So in some regards, you're avoiding work because you don't have to go into the brood chamber and remove queen cells every week. But there's a lot of work at the up front. You're up front loading all of this work. You've got to go in and do a major manipulation to start with. You have to go in later and remove all the queen cells here. But once you've done that, it's done. The other issue is that it may temporarily be more difficult to treat for mites while you've got brood up here and brood down here. You may want to consider, did you need to do a mite treatment around then? That's a bit of a tricky one because you've now got brood spread all over the place. You're far better off with brood concentrated in one place if you're doing a mite treatment. So that can be a factor to consider. And the other thing is that you may notice that you're putting brood chambers up here, double deep for that matter, up at the top of a hive, which might be quite large, and so heavy lifting. So bear that in mind as well, because it can be pretty awkward working with deep supers up at eye level that are full of honey, and you've got to get them off at some point. And in order to check anything down here, you've got to be lifting off some pretty deep, pretty heavy supers. But what you can do is as soon as they're filled, get them off. As soon as they're filled, get them off. You could even take them and put them on another hive to get them finished off so you don't have your deeps up here making life hard for yourself. So it's quite complicated, the different options that we've looked at there. But if you go through it, watch the video again, you'll see that this is a great way of avoiding swarming by separating the queen from particularly the young workforce, who then move away from the queen, depopulating the brood chambers, which results in no further swarming activity from the queen and the rest of the hive. You do have to check those brood chambers that you've separated from the queen initially to take out those queen cells. But once that's done, they produce a lot of honey. And the Demaree method is a great way to stop swarming, build up a big population of bees, which gives you the best shot at a big honey crop. I hope you found that useful. I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. See you next time.